think it's time to build a Monstercross again. It's winter and I haven't done a Monstercross in a while, and it's a kind of build that I really enjoy. There's a few things to consider though. It's pretty difficult to make a Monstercross out of a 90's mountain bike frame. And the main reason is that the geometry in the 90's was pretty much very long top tube coupled with a very long stem, and when you try to combine that with drop bars, as I have here, as you can see, I just started pulling stuff off other bikes in the garage to just check things out, see if this could become a cool build, doing some mock-ups. The thing is, when you do drop bars on a 90's mountain bike frame, you often have the situation long top tube, long stem, and then even longer drop bars. It just looks silly. It of course becomes a very stretched out position that doesn't feel good, and it just looks odd. What I want to achieve now is a Monstercross build that looks okay, that looks like it was designed like that. And the key component to achieve that is to find a stem that is really short. This is actually of a kid's bike. It's a 1 inch, so it's a quill stem that works in this 1990 Trek 950. Usually the lug treks have 1/8 inch steerer, but the 1990 has a 1 inch, so a classical quill stem will work here, and I think that's gonna give it the right look together with drop bars. This stem would also work. That's a Nitto. I think it's 70mm, but obviously this one gives it an even more compact look, and I think it's gonna give a good riding position. People often say you should size down for a Monstercross build. I think it's better to work with shortening the stem and get a good cockpit setup. So I'm gonna go with that. I also want to keep this XT seat post. That's a pretty dope one, and all of these graphics on the bike are black. So what I'm going for here is really this white frame with the black components. I'm gonna have a modern mountain bike drivetrain. At the moment I have an NX rear derailleur, so I think I'm gonna keep that. The main problem, of course, with drop bars is that a normal shifter won't fit here because the diameter is 25.4mm, so you cannot force a normal mountain bike shifter to go on there. One option is to use, like I have done here, sorry the lighting is pretty bad, that's a bar end shifter, basically from a road bike. So this is actually really nice. It's a Dura Ace 10-speed, and the cool thing with this is that 10-speed road has the same pull ratio as a mountain bike rear derailleur when you talk about 7, 8, 9, up to 9 speed. So you can use an old mountain bike derailleur, couple it with this Dura Ace shifter. I guess I will put a comment on what the actual model number is, and that will actually make it a 10-speed drivetrain. It's gonna work perfectly. I've done it many times before, so that's a cool hack. But for this build I actually want it to be able to handle some rough trails, so I want a clutched rear derailleur. God, that's a hard word. and that means I have to find a way to get a mountain bike shifter mounted on drop bars, but I have ways to do it, so I will show that later. For the brakes, I want to have this kind of mix of old and new, so I want to stay with the Canti brakes. I had this on for a previous build. They are pretty cool. I think they are the MT62, the ones that kind of stick out. I'm gonna replace them with some black XT Canti that I have, and I think that's gonna give it a little bit more sleeker look. So what do we do with tires? We need to have fat tires because that's kind of what I do. And to have a big cassette like here, we obviously need to have a little bit more modern hub, because a Trek from 1990 was 7-speed, and a 7-speed hub and cassette body will not take a big modern 11-speed cassette like here. So what I got here is, it's actually a pretty old wheel. This is an XTR M900, which I guess was the first 8-speed. So this one will take, it has a long enough body, freewheel body, to mount an 11-speed cassette. So I'm gonna use this wheel. At the moment I got some hookworms mounted, but I need to replace that with a more chunky tire. But it's gonna be a big fat tire because that's what I like. So the spec will be those tires with the pretty wide rims, but with some Maxis. Let's see if we can get that. That's the high roller 2.3, and might even try to set this up tubeless because that should work. Alright, that's some of the build ideas, some of the components I'm gonna use. So I guess it's just time to start dismantling what needs to be removed from the frame, and then let's get going. So here's the shifter. That's a Sunrace 11-speed, and this will never go onto a drop bar. It will basically break this. So we need to find an alternative to get a modern shifter onto the normal road classical drop bars. Let's get the Canti brakes off. Pretty nice day here in Munich this Sunday, but it's bit cold to be out wrenching, so I think I'm gonna have to move inside, find some spot. But yeah, maybe get the shifter off also. Oh, I'm never gonna find that again. And how are you? Oh no, it fell down. It was not even attached. Let's put you in there. That guy. That's it. You are free. So before we go any deeper into the build, I want to check out some photos from when I picked up this bike about 2 years ago. I think I bought it for 20 euros. It was in pretty beat up shape with a lot of the extra stuff you usually find on old bikes. But it had a nice steel frame, a few good components that I could use, and unfortunately a split rear rim. So we had an STX RC, also a cracked front chainring, so a lot of rust and bad things happened to this bike. It was outside for a long time. Anyways, I could see potential in it. I kind of like white frames. The main issue I had was a really stuck bottom bracket, so I had to resort to some special tools here to sort out that situation. Anyways, really nice XT seat post and a front wheel that I gave to one of my followers on Instagram recently. I did make a mock-up of this bike as a drop bar, and I really liked that look, but at the time I never really went for this build. So I think now it's time to get back to this. I think that's looking very promising. That's gonna look pretty dope. Oh no, I'm in the view even. I really hate when you see the shadow of people in the shots, but I guess I have to be in the video at some point. That's gonna look dope. I feel excited just looking at this now. Those are the high rollers. I really like to unpack and unfold a brand new set of tires. I got a lot of Maxxis tires. There was a clearance sale from a company that went bust last year, and I got a small pile of these pretty aggressive Maxxis tires. That's why you see them on quite a lot of my builds. So what I try to take care of when I mount a tire, of course, to check the directional. Most tires are directional, so you need to put them on the right way around. And I also try to line up the text markings on the tires with the valve stem to have it centered in the middle. So that usually looks the best. I went for an inner tube here. I might do a tubeless setup on this at a later point, but I didn't have the time for this build. I've done it quite a lot of times. It's definitely possible even though you have an old rim, even though it's not recommended or out of spec, but I've done that on many of my bikes with no problems. Usually Continental tires are better for that. Maxis is a bit more difficult to set on the rim bead. Yeah, kind of decided to go for my noisy tool here instead of pumping by hand, even though it was a Sunday. So 2 bar is what I set into the tire. I don't think it's completely perfect, so I will probably need to work on that to get it to set the rim bead properly. Rear wheel, same approach here. That's a pretty big Sunrace 50 teeth cassette, 11 speed. I'm not decided if I'm gonna use this one. I think it looks okay, but I might want to have something a little bit smaller. We'll see. Really like the smell and the feel of unfolding a new tire. I was able to wrestle this one on by hand, so that's why it might be difficult to make a tubeless setup. When it's easy enough for me to just do it by hand, it's probably too loose. Also try to relax the valve stem so that it's straight and not pointing in any direction. I'm putting on the cap. I didn't always do it, but I think it kind of completes the look, even though it's not necessary, but for me it looks better. Then I'm moving on to the bottom bracket. I had to set up here in the basement where I have my home gym. I don't have a bike rack, but the squat rack actually works pretty well to do this kind of work. And it's still definitely not the dream build kind of videography that we're seeing here. I'm still learning how to set up the lights and the camera and where the good positions are. Still need to buy some stuff. I need a better microphone. I need a tripod for the camera. But I hope all of that will come as I progress with my skills. Trying to use a good quality grease here. Bought a pretty big jar of it, and I'm building a lot of bikes, so I'm using that. Should get a grease gun too. I had some issues with this bottom bracket. It was not running smoothly, so I think I over tightened the drive side, so I had to adjust that, and in the end it was running smoothly. Next up are the cranks. These are some LX cranks that I painted black and put on a narrow wide chain ring. I think it's some cheap Chinese brand. And I also have some bash guards from Hope, so gives a little bit of bling with the red and the purple. But the clearance is good to the frame, and I didn't want to tear down some other bike, so I decided to go for this. Usually I build my wheels first, then I put the wheels in the frame, and that's basically my substitute from having a bike rack where I hang the frame. So this was a little bit of a new position for me, but in the end it worked out fine. Cranks were spinning nicely. Then we're moving on to this very short stem. So I just make sure to grease it up in the steerer and around the expander bolt to make sure it won't get stuck in there. Not so much of a problem for me because I rebuild my bikes a lot. And this is the cable stop for the canty brake. It's actually what came with the bike. It's definitely not an original part from a Trek 950. But it's gonna work for this build. I tried to get the stem down as low as I could, then just tightening it up, but we are gonna have to readjust this after then installing the drop bars. Bearings feel good on this bike, really running smoothly. So after doing some of that work, it's definitely time to just pop the tires and wheels in there and just set up the bike and have a look. I like to say that's the stance of the bike. I guess that's coming from, automotive world, people who are into cars, but I think there's definitely a stance to how a bike is sitting with the seat post, with the stem and the tires. So I just like to set it up, make myself a coffee, and just sit and think about the build and the next steps. I would say that's a very important part of the process. Okay, so now it's time to sit back and have a look on your creation. I think that's looking promising. Tires look pretty brutal. There's enough tire clearance. 2.3s. Difficult to see here. I put in the cable stop. Some pretty blingy cranks. Are they hitting? No. Next part of the process is to get the brakes cleaned and set up. These came off some random bike that I bought. It's the black XT Canty that I really like. Unfortunately, they were really stuck. I had to put in a lot of force to get the bolts open. This was not a complete rebuild of these brakes. I just wanted to get them working, to be functional, get rid of some of the rust and old grease and stuff. So it was more of a quick and dirty job here. Get them 98% okay. But yeah, these bolts were really rusted and stuck. I'm glad I had the proper tool for this, so it's not slipping. And yeah, still had the XT brake pads, which was a nice surprise. The brake pads, they had some uneven wear and they were really hard on the surface. So what I tried to do is to take a sandpaper, sand it down and kind of refresh and bring them back to life, make them smooth again. That actually usually works out pretty well. In many cases I go for cool stuff, but I really wanted to use these new XT pads. Well, not new, refreshed. Here we can see the difference from the shiny old surface and the refreshed new surface. After that, just cleaning with some ethanol to remove all the grease and grime. Make sure they're gonna work well when I set them up. The brakes themselves I just hit with some WD-40 and then just polished up a bit. And then we're back in the basement again. So just installing the brakes. I take care to grease up the posts before so that they are smooth. Also, of course, doing this on the bolts so that they will come out easily for the next time when I change things up, or for the next owner. Usually go for the middle hole, try to get the right tension. Canty brakes are a bit fiddly to set up, but I like them a lot better than V-brakes. Not in terms of braking power, V-brake is very good, but just the look. Usually when I set up V-brakes and they're not completely perfectly aligned, I think it doesn't look right. I kinda also like to have the wires and everything. Gives me the right retro vibe. And usually I manage to make them really performant as well, so no problem in that department. You have to forgive me for some of these angles and shots. I'm still figuring out what works. It's more difficult than you think. So looking at the guys like Gary's project, Toasty Rides, Monkey Shreds and other dream builds. I guess they have practiced and found what looks good, and I hope I will get there in the coming videos. It's maybe not the most exciting stuff, but when you've done this a few times, you learn how to master all the parameters that goes into setting up a country brake. It's much more than for a V brake, but it's definitely possible to learn and manage. Having a proper tool like this spanner really helps instead of having some clumsy tool. Sometimes it would also be nice to have a third hand, but yeah, it works. So that's basically it for the first part of this build. Coming from the old 90's Trek 950, a shit bike that I now turn into something unique. A winter bike, call it a gravel bike, I call it a Monstercross. I look forward to taking you into the next part of this build, where I will set up the drop bar, the cockpit, all the controls, the wires. So hope it's going to be an interesting journey for you too. And with that, I say goodbye and until next time.